Long ago, in a distant corner of the Roman Empire, there was a land both troubled and beautiful. It was called Judea. The people there lived between old prophecies and new rulers, between silence and anticipation. The air itself seemed to carry a quiet weight, a longing for change, for peace, for someone promised long ago. The Roman Empire ruled with roads and swords, but in Judea, what truly ruled the people was their ancient faith. The words of prophets, the rhythm of rituals, the memory of Moses and David. It was a land waiting for a Messiah, waiting for deliverance. And while empires wrote history in grand events and wars, something entirely different was quietly unfolding in the hills of Galilee. In the small village of Nazareth, hidden between soft ridges and olive trees, lived a young woman named Mary. She was ordinary. She gathered water from the well. She listened to the elders in the synagogue. She likely watched the stars and wondered about her future, as young people do. But one evening, or perhaps one morning, it's never quite clear, she received a visit from an angel, they say, a messenger of God. The words were gentle but life-changing. She would bear a son. His name would be Jesus. There was no parade, no fanfare, just quiet acceptance. The months passed. Mary and her betrothed, Joseph, a carpenter by trade, traveled to Bethlehem for the census, a Roman administrative act that had no idea it was helping fulfill a prophecy. And in Bethlehem, crowded and unprepared, Jesus was born. Not in a palace, not even in a house, but in a stable, a quiet, earthy place, with animals, with straw, with stars overhead and silence around. Shepherds came. They had seen a light in the sky, or perhaps heard voices singing peace on earth. Later, much later, wise men from the east arrived, following a strange star that had appeared just for this purpose.
The baby Jesus lay in a manger, a feeding trough, really, wrapped in simple cloth.
The moment was unremarkable to most of the world, just another baby, just another night. But for some, the stillness felt different, as if something ancient and new had just begun. And then years passed. Jesus grew up in Nazareth, a dusty town, a quiet one. He likely played with other children, helped Joseph with his carpentry, and walked the gentle paths that curled through the hills of Galilee. The Bible tells us very little about these years. There is one story, however. When Jesus was 12, his family went to Jerusalem for the Passover. After the celebration, they began their journey home. But Jesus stayed behind. They found him days later in the temple, sitting with the teachers, asking questions, giving answers. People were astonished, but then, just like that, he returned home, and once again, silence.
We imagine him as a young man, learning to shape wood,
To smooth it, to build tables and doors. His hands likely strong, his mind perhaps already filled with scripture and insight. But for almost 2 decades, there is no record of what he said or did, just quiet growth, private preparation. And so the world turned. Rome remained powerful. Herod's descendants ruled. The temple in Jerusalem stood, but tension simmered beneath its stones. People still hoped, still prayed, still waited. And in Nazareth, the carpenter's son grew, slowly, quietly, until the time came to speak. When Jesus was about 30 years old, something shifted, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, steady way. For most of his life, he'd lived in Nazareth, a small town with dusty roads, familiar faces, and ordinary days. He worked with wood, learned the rhythms of life, and likely enjoyed the simple things. Shared meals, conversations, the hum of tools in a carpenter's shop. But now, the time for quiet preparation had come to an end. Word had started to spread about a man named John the Baptist, as people called him. He wasn't like the other religious figures. He lived out in the wilderness, wore rough camel hair, and ate locusts and wild honey. He preached by the Jordan River and called people to repent, to change, to start again. And somehow, people listened. They came from towns and villages, walking dusty miles, just to be baptized by him in the river. One day, Jesus showed up. He wasn't surrounded by crowds. He didn't draw attention to himself. He simply stepped into line like everyone else. When John saw him, something changed. He hesitated. "I should be baptized by you," John said. But Jesus replied, gently and calmly, "Let it be so for now. It's the right thing to do." And so, Jesus was baptized. As he came up from the water, the story says that the heavens opened and a voice spoke, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." It wasn't loud like thunder, and there was no applause, just a moment, simple and sacred. After that, Jesus didn't rush into crowds or build a platform. He went alone into the desert. For 40 days, no food, no comfort, just quiet. It was a time of testing, personal, private. He was tempted, not with chaos or violence, but with questions, subtle suggestions. If you really are who you say you are. But he didn't argue. He just answered with scripture, calmly, steadily. And when the silence returned, he walked out of the wilderness, ready. Then came the slow beginning. He didn't go to the capital city. He didn't start at the temple. Instead, he walked along the Sea of Galilee, small towns, fishing villages. He spoke with regular people, everyday workers, and he said 2 words that changed lives: "Follow me." Peter, Andrew, James, John, they left their nets, their boats, their routines, and followed a man who had no army, no wealth, no grand plan, just words that rang true. Jesus began to teach, not from stages or platforms, but from hillsides and boats. He told stories about sheep, seeds, lamps, coins. They were simple, yet they lingered in people's minds. He didn't preach with fire. He spoke with clarity, with kindness. His tone was never rushed. His words made people stop and think. He healed people, but even his miracles were quiet. He touched a leper. He whispered to a child. He told a paralyzed man to stand. There was no drama, just compassion. And people followed him, not because they fully understood him, but because they felt seen, known, loved. He didn't avoid sinners. He ate with them, sat at their tables, listened to their stories. When others judged, he said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." He didn't just forgive people. He gave them dignity. The crowds grew. The whispers spread. Religious leaders started to feel uneasy. They didn't like his calm confidence. They didn't like how the people listened to him. But Jesus didn't argue. He didn't fight. He just kept walking, teaching, healing. One slow, steady step at a time.
He spoke of a kingdom, not of politics or power, but of grace and humility. A kingdom where the last would be first, where the meek would inherit the earth, where peace mattered more than position. It was not the kingdom people expected, but it was one their hearts seemed to recognize. And so he kept going, town to town, village to village, sometimes on foot, sometimes by boat, sometimes in silence, sometimes with laughter, always with purpose. And still, many didn't understand. Even those closest to him struggled to keep up. But he was patient, always patient, even when tired, even when misunderstood. The journey wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but it was real. A carpenter's son, now a teacher, with sand on his feet, dust in his hair, and something in his voice that made the world lean in. Jesus kept walking. Town after town, the dust clung to his sandals, but his steps were never hurried. He spoke when it mattered, stayed silent when it didn't. His voice was never raised in anger. His power wasn't in force, but in presence. There was a strange peace about him, like he knew something the rest of the world was still figuring out. His followers grew in number, but not in status. They were fishermen, tax collectors, women with rough stories and quiet strength. They didn't always understand him. In fact, most of the time, they didn't. But still they stayed. Not because of what he gave them, but because of who he was. And something about being near him made them want to be better, to be more. There were moments when crowds gathered, thousands sometimes. People brought their sick, their blind, their broken. And Jesus would touch them, one by one. No rush, no show, just healing, like it came naturally to him, as if love, for him, was a reflex, not a decision. He told stories still, parables, he called them. They were simple, almost childlike, but inside each one was a kind of quiet truth, like a seed you don't even realize is growing until much later. A man sowing seeds, a woman searching for a coin, a father waiting for a lost son. They weren't just stories. They were mirrors. People saw themselves in them, even if they didn't say it out loud. He calmed a storm once, on a boat with his disciples. The waves were crashing, the wind howling, and everyone thought they were going to die. Jesus was asleep. When they woke him, scared out of their minds, he stood up, looked at the sea, and said, "Peace, be still." And everything stopped. Just like that. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, it was quiet, but it changed them. Still, trouble was building. The religious leaders, the ones who wore the right robes and said the right prayers, didn't like him. He didn't fit their system. He healed on the Sabbath. He forgave sins. He sat with outcasts. He spoke with authority, but never sought approval. And that made them nervous. They started watching him more closely, asking trick questions, trying to trap him with words. But Jesus wasn't playing their game. He answered with wisdom, with parables, with silence. He didn't need to win debates. He had nothing to prove. But beneath all the teaching and healing, there was a growing sense that something was coming. He began to speak differently to his disciples, more seriously. He talked about leaving, about dying, about being rejected. They didn't understand. How could they? He was their hope, their anchor,
The idea of him being taken away, it didn't make sense. And yet, he didn't resist the path ahead. He kept walking, knowing full well where the road would lead. To tension, to betrayal, to pain, but also to something deeper, something lasting. Still, there were moments of quiet joy. Meals shared, children laughing as he blessed them. Walks by the sea, long talks under olive trees. He wasn't always serious. He smiled too. He noticed things others missed. The widow dropping her last coin into the offering. The fig tree by the road. The woman who touched the edge of his robe, believing that would be enough. He saw people, really saw them, and being seen by him, it changed things. Not with force, not with fear, but with something gentler, something stronger. And so the journey continued, step by step, soft and steady, not to escape the coming storm, but to meet it, head on, heart open. Jerusalem was louder than the towns he'd known. Stone streets echoed with sandals and shouting. Markets bustled, soldiers barked orders, and the temple rose like a mountain at the city's heart. People had come from everywhere for Passover. Tired travelers, anxious merchants, restless prophets. And Jesus walked among them, almost unnoticed at first. But he had entered the city differently. On a donkey, not a horse, not a chariot, a donkey. Simple, almost silly really. And yet the crowd laid down their cloaks. They waved palm branches. They shouted, "Hosanna," as if a king had come. Maybe they believed one had, but not the kind they expected.
He didn't go straight to the palace. He went to the temple, and what he found there made him stop. Money changers, merchants, greed in the place where prayer should have been. So he turned over the tables, not in rage, but in grief. "My Father's house," he said softly, "should be a house of prayer." Then he left, just walked out. At night, he didn't stay in the city. He went to the Mount of Olives, quiet hills just outside the noise. There, he taught his disciples, told them of things to come, of destruction, of endings, of hope still shining through it all. They listened, confused. He didn't explain everything. Some truths can't be rushed. And then came the upper room. They gathered for the Passover meal, just 13 of them. Jesus knelt first, took a towel, washed their feet one by one. Even Judas, especially Judas. No one understood why he did it, but he did. At the table, the bread was broken. "This is my body," he said. The wine was poured. "This is my blood." They didn't understand. Not fully. But the moment was heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then he spoke of betrayal, of being handed over. Eyes shifted, heart sank, and Judas stood and walked out into the night. The door closed softly behind him. Later in the garden, Jesus prayed, alone. The others were near, but they slept. He knelt under the olive trees. The same trees that had watched for centuries now watched him weep. Not loud sobs, just quiet surrender. "If it's possible," he whispered, "let this cup pass from me, but not my will, yours." And then they came. Torches in the night, the clatter of armor, and Judas leading them with a kiss. Jesus didn't run. He didn't fight. He stepped forward and said, "I am he." They arrested him, bound him like a criminal. His disciples scattered, shadows swallowed them. Peter followed from a distance. He was brave until he wasn't. 3 times he was asked if he knew Jesus. 3 times he said no, and the rooster crowed like a cold reminder. Jesus stood trial that night. False witnesses, twisted words, questions with no answers, silence. Through it all, he remained calm, as if his peace came from a deeper place than this world could touch. They beat him, mocked him. A crown of thorns was pushed onto his head, not in honor, but in cruelty. They draped a robe over his wounds, laughed, spat. Still he said nothing. And as morning broke, the world still turned. Birds still sang, but everything had changed. The sky, it seemed, was holding its breath, because love, the kind that doesn't flinch, was walking straight into pain and refusing to stop. They led him outside the city. No speeches, no resistance, just footsteps over stone and dust. The cross on his back wasn't polished or clean. It was heavy, splintered, meant to break people. And Jesus carried it as far as his body allowed. Then he fell, and someone else was pulled from the crowd to carry it the rest of the way. The place was called Golgotha. It wasn't high, just a hill, dry earth, the kind of place people passed quickly without looking. But that day, people stopped, some to weep, others to mock. Soldiers gambled for his robe. The sky grew darker, even though it was still midday. They nailed him to the wood, slowly, carefully, like it was just another job. And then they lifted the cross and let it stand. He said almost nothing. A few words, a prayer for forgiveness, a promise to the man beside him, a cry that sounded like loneliness wrapped in love. He wasn't loud. He didn't curse. He just endured. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Hours passed, and then, when everything hurt and nothing was left, he said, "It is finished." He breathed his last, and the earth trembled like it knew. People walked away afterward, slowly, unsure what had just happened. The centurion, the one who had watched it all with trained eyes, whispered something no soldier usually said. Truly, this was the Son of God. His body was taken down, wrapped in linen, placed in a tomb borrowed from a man who had more money than most, but maybe also more faith than most. A stone rolled over the entrance, heavy, final. The world went quiet. Saturday came like a long sigh. The disciples hid. The women wept. No miracles, no thunder, just silence, long and cold and hard to bear. But early Sunday morning, while the sky was still pale and the dew clung to the grass, a few women walked to the tomb, not to witness a miracle, just to finish the burial. They found the stone moved, and inside, nothing. No body, no cloth-wrapped figure, just a folded piece of linen, and an angel, calm, gentle. "He is not here," he said. "He is risen." They ran, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. Hope, wonder, the kind of joy that hasn't found words yet. Jesus appeared again,
Not in bright flashes, not in the temple, but in gardens, in quiet rooms, on a beach, while the sun rose and fish cooked over a fire. He let them touch his hands. He walked with them on dusty roads. He ate with them. He forgave them. He called them friends. And before he left, he promised one thing: I am with you always. Not in a loud way, but in a steady one, like breath, like sunrise, like peace that doesn't leave when things get hard. And then he ascended, slowly, quietly, into the clouds. Not an ending, just a beginning, and the story kept going.